Your affairs come to order. Thank you all for joining us last month. We defeated the latest in a long, never-ending, it seems, line of attacks on the CFPB by the corporate interests that want the agency off their backs. In the end, the American people won and Wall Street lost. Now that the CFPB is finally done fighting a ridiculous lawsuit, it can focus on what it does best, getting people their money back. Not that during the lawsuit they didn't keep fighting to get their money back, of course. Supreme Court's ruling upholding the CFPB is a victory for hardworking families in Ohio, for military families managing their finances, for students trying to pay back their loans, for older Americans trying to guard against financial predators. Most people don't have fancy lawyers, don't have high-priced lobbyists to fight for them. CFPB works on behalf of everyone else, fighting for their rights and their hard-earned money. That includes their latest action this week, eliminating medical debt from credit reports. Thank you for that, Director. This is something many of us have pushed for that will protect the credit scores of millions of Americans. Medical debt is particularly damaging to consumers, as many on this committee, including Senator Smith, have pointed out. 15 million Americans still have medical bills in their credit reports, but people don't choose to get sick or injured, obviously. Medical debt can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter if you're doing things right in your life. Anyone can get sick. Anyone can get in a car accident. It has nothing to do with your ability to pay your bills, which shouldn't have anything to do with your ability to pay your bills. Medical debt doesn't correlate with credit risks. It correlates with illness and injury. Has no place in credit reports. When this rule is finalized, all Americans will have medical debt removed, wiped off their credit reports for good. No one should be rejected for a car loan because of a sick family member or forced to pay higher mortgage rates because of a medical emergency. Our credit scores should reflect our financial health, not our physical health. Medical debt rule isn't the only thing CFPB is working on. CFPB is working on to save people money. It's doing important work reducing costs for consumers by targeting junk fees. Junk fees are the surprise, often last-minute charges, just one more add-on that drive up the cost of products. They have no justification or connection to anything other than corporations' thirst for profits. Junk fees obscure the true cost, preventing consumers from shopping around to find the lowest price. Earlier this year, CFPB took a major step in reducing junk fees and costs for consumers with its credit card late fee rule. According to one report, 1 in 5 adult Americans paid a credit card late fee last year. 2022, that meant credit card companies charged consumers more than $14 billion in late fees. When the CFPB ran the numbers, they found that credit card companies were charging consumers more than five times the costs associated with late payments, including collections. These are massive trillion-dollar Wall Street companies. The idea that you are missing your payment due date by a day or two is imposing some huge cost on the credit card company is just patently ridiculous. CFPB is putting an end to this and lowering fees. Another major source of out-of-control unfair costs in financial services is payday lenders. We've pushed for years to crack down on these shady lenders that target my state's working families, including military service members and veterans, with high-interest predatory loans designed to trap them in a cycle of debt. Many Americans have to renew their payday loans so many times, they end up paying much more in fees than the amount they borrowed. We have seen that time and time again. 2021, we took on the payday lending lobbyists fighting to protect state laws that limit the interest these financial predators can charge, and we won. CFPB is doing important work to protect consumers from payday lenders. The agency's payday lender rule will curb some of the worst practices. They'll help consumers avoid abusive debt traps. Finally, I want to talk about one of the most important things CFPB does, stand up for service members and veterans. When we created the CFPB, we made sure it included the Office of Service Member Affairs. Every year, tens of thousands of service members seek the CFPB's assistance or report a complaint. I particularly hear about those in Miami Valley around Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The number of service members getting help has increased for each of the last 3 years. That has a whole lot to do with your work. CFPB goes to bat for them, works to get their money back or fix the problems threatening their finances, but also threatening their jobs. CFPB has returned more than $183 million to service members and veterans, money that companies took straight from service members and veterans' pockets. Overall, in the last dozen years, CFPB has returned $21 billion to more than 205 million consumers. These numbers are not they're not hypothetical. They're real checks that land in real people's mailboxes. Dollars might mean a little extra breathing room to buy groceries or fill up a tank of gas. It's why it's so critical we have the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Wall Street has lawyers and lobbyists. Working people have the CFPB, something we all should remember. I'll always fight for its work that gets money back into people's bank accounts. It stops bad actors from cheating honest families, that stand up for consumers when they may have nowhere else to turn. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Chopra, thank you for being here with us today. I will say that listening to Chairman Brown's comments, it sounds like we're talking about two completely different agencies, and frankly, I'm sure our view is completely different. The CFPB has not been idle in its pursuits. Based on the pace and scope of announcements I see coming out of your agency, it looks like full steam ahead. I think the celebratory cheers from 17th Street echoed all the way over here after the Supreme Court ruling. However, I want to be clear that their decision on CFPB's funding structure only increases my concerns about the agency's lack of accountability. Time after time, your agency brushes aside congressional concerns, forges ahead with political agendas, and pushes well past the boundaries of its authority. This ruling is not a green light for your progressive wish list. And when we look at the reaction to your regulations, it's a litany of lawsuits, all of which take time, attention, and resources away from the laws you should be implementing and enforcing, as well as the American consumers you should be protecting. So frankly, it makes me wonder, what consumers are you protecting? The CFPB is supposed to be an independent agency, but under your leadership, it seems the Bureau works hand in hand with the White House and appears more interested in scoring headlines for the Biden administration than doing its job. Whether it's standing with President Biden as he unveiled the junk fees campaign, or as we saw yesterday with the Vice President announcing your new proposal to ban medical debt from credit reports. The political coordination is crystal clear. You're not protecting consumers or saving people money. Instead, you're peddling a false narrative that the Biden administration is doing something to reduce the actual costs. But then reality hits, and we realize this administration's actions simply shift who saves and who pays. It is well past time we end this junk fees narrative and focus on the junk philosophy behind them. With every action taken, there are trade-offs, and those trade-offs have consequences. In this case, the administration is trading a punchy headline proclaiming they are saving families money today while actually building higher costs down the road. Take, for example, your credit card late fees rule. While the rule may save some folks around $20 each time they make a late payment, how much will it cost these same consumers when they no longer qualify for a credit card because they haven't paid their balances on time? How much will it cost them when their credit score drops as a result of these late payments? How much will it cost them when the rate for their car loans and their mortgages go up, not down? You can't just keep erasing the bad facts to fit your political narrative. The bill always, and unfortunately, always comes due. You've made a choice to try to curry political favor with little regard to the harm it will cause Americans down the road. You have done this to America's small businesses as well. Small businesses tell me the same story over and over again, and that story is simply a Washington shakedown designed to be little more than a gotcha exercise. Just like the CFPB's Civil Investigative Demands, or CID process. Under your CID process, the Bureau may issue, without any court order, a subpoena to a business when you are looking into potential violations of the law. And once that subpoena has been issued, the CFPB can demand nearly anything they want, from reams of documents to executive testimony. So what does that mean for a company that draws the ire of your agency? It means years of costly investigation with little hope of relief, or in other words, a bureaucratic witch hunt. One small business recently described the process to me. I thought this was really incredible to see what the government can do to you as opposed to for you. For 3 years, the CFPB audited this company, but this audit resulted in no fines, no reprimands, and no additional CFPB action. Then in 2022, 4 years later, the CFPB issued the first CID, which resulted in 12,000 pages of document production and testimony under oath for the CEO. But again, you took no action. Then in 2023, the CFPB issued another CID, broadening the scope further and requesting millions of pages of documents. This time, the firm attempted to fight back and appeal. But unfortunately, for this small business, the only option for appeal is through the CFPB itself. Not surprisingly, the agency rejected the appeal. To date, after countless hours of employee time and hundreds of thousands of dollars of outside legal fees, the CFPB has taken no action. And this is just one example of a story which is playing out across the country every day for far too many small businesses. American consumers and businesses deserve better. They deserve protection by their government from bad actors and to be left alone when they are simply trying to make a living.
Thank you, Senator Scott. The Honorable Roy Chopra has served as the Director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau since October 12th, 2021, when he was confirmed. He's worked at CFPB in his early days, serving as Assistant Director and Student Loan Ombudsman shortly after the agency opened its doors. He's also been an FTC Commissioner. Director Chopra, you're recognized.
Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, thank you for holding this hearing today. Since its creation, the CFPB has returned $20.7 billion to consumers through law enforcement activity and created unquantifiable returns for the over 205 million Americans and honest businesses harmed by the legal practices we have stopped. We're currently on track to save customers $20 billion in junk fees every year, and we also expect to process over 2 million complaints this year. Since my last report, we have advanced a number of key initiatives on financial data, medical debt, and credit cards. First, we're making major progress when it comes to financial privacy in an increasingly digital marketplace. The U.S. has to lead when it comes to a competitive and innovative market. At the same time, this can't be at the expense of unchecked surveillance like we see in China and other markets. We're progressing toward finalizing open banking rules to develop data sharing standards and privacy protections when people transfer their financial data to competing companies. We finalized a key part of this framework last week, which will set the stage for finalizing the rest of the rule required by Congress this fall. We're also moving forward to propose a rule under the Fair Credit Reporting Act to restrict uses of certain sensitive data by data brokers as part of a broad government effort to protect our national security and service members from countries of concern that might seek to purchase and exploit sensitive data on Americans. While the CFPB is taking important steps on protecting financial data, it's critical that Congress acts too. Since my last appearance, there have been reports that large financial firms like PayPal and JPMorgan Chase are planning to use sensitive data about people's income and spending to fuel surveillance-based targeting and advertising. These plans to monetize sensitive financial transaction data are a reminder that the U.S. is slowly lurching toward more surveillance and even financial censorship. We're eager to work with you to do more to protect against abuse and misuse of data, including by enshrining stronger protections into law. We also believe there's opportunities to advance legislation to accelerate open and decentralized banking in our country. Second, we proposed a rule to prohibit the inclusion of medical bills in credit reports and credit scores. This will prevent debt collectors from using the credit reporting system to coerce patients into paying erroneous bills. Lastly, we're continuing to focus on the trillion-dollar credit card market. We've closed a loophole exploited by large credit card companies, lowering most of those fees to $8. Credit card companies will still be able to penalize their customers, and they'll still be able to charge a fee exceeding $8 if they can show their math. But we know there's much more to watch here. The CFPB is looking at how to protect people's points and rewards from devaluation and bait and switch tactics. We're taking steps to jumpstart more competition so that small banks and credit unions offering credit cards with lower rates can gain share. All of these efforts will lead to billions of dollars in savings every year. These are just some of the many initiatives the CFPB is pursuing, many of them specifically required by Congress. And there's also so many areas we're watching to ensure that the financial system is helping American families and businesses get ahead. I've appeared before this committee, Mr. Chairman, many, many times, and I've had the chance to meet with so many of you on both sides of the aisle. I do think there is so much more we can do together to tackle the problems that our country faces. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Director, for your concise testimony. Medical debt, as we know, as you've said, as many of us in this committee have said, does not reflect spending habits or help lenders predict risk. Medical debt places patients at risk of downgraded credit, costs them money, and they can fall victim to predatory debt collection practices. We've seen cases, perhaps unbelievably, of companies repossessing people's wheelchairs, and in some cases, even repossessing their prosthetic legs. So I was happy to see CFPB just announce its proposed rule to prohibit medical debt from being included on credit reports, removing medical debt from more than 15 million Americans' credit reports. Talk about, if you would, how this rule will affect consumers, and will eliminating medical debt also help those kinds of abusive debt collection practices?
Well, you said it earlier, there's a big difference between taking out a mortgage or a credit card or an auto loan versus a medical bill appearing on your credit report. There's been over a decade of empirical evidence to show the much higher rates of inaccuracy and also the lack of predictive power of medical bills to determine repayment on other loans. We have seen the credit reporting system turn into a weapon, often to coerce people into paying things they already paid or never owed in the first place. We think this is going to go a long way, this proposal, to alleviate some of those abuses. And of course, there will still be many ways to collect on those debts, but using the credit reporting system to coerce people, I think it goes beyond what Congress intended.
Thank you. The credit card late fee rule lowered the typical credit card late payment from $32 to $8 for larger card issuers. Those who it applied to, they claimed this rule wouldn't cover the costs associated with late payments, as you know. Americans can't afford these high fees far in excess of the cost of service provided. These include credit card late fees. During the CFPB's comment period, companies had time to attempt to justify their high fees. Did any large credit card issuer show their math justifying a $32 late fee?
No.
They just simply didn't. They can't prove that such a high fee was necessary. Are large card issuers making huge profits from late fees, I assume?
Yeah, well, we estimate that this loophole in the rules has led to $10 billion in extra revenues for those issuers. Congress prohibited disproportionate and unreasonable penalties, but this loophole has been seized upon and abused, and I think it's overdue that we close it.
Well, and it's pretty obvious to all of us that are fair-minded on this podium that credit card issues shouldn't be extracting profits from consumers through late fees. First of all, because it's just simply on the face of it and beyond unfair. Second, because these fees are required to be reasonable and proportional to cost. And I think you've illustrated that both with your actions and with these your answer to these questions. A last question. For the millions of Americans who use apps like Cash App and Zelle and Venmo, fraud's a growing problem. For service members and their families, fraud on payment apps is particularly concerning. Their steady income, their frequent moves make them targets for scammers. I've seen that especially around Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, but also Yars and Youngstown and Toledo and Mansfield, where I grew up, in Springfield. Their steady income, as I said, and frequent moves makes them more of a target. CFPB, something Senator Reed's worked on pretty much his whole career. The CFPB identified several risks to military families, including serious financial harm from fraud and from unauthorized access on apps. You've proposed a rule that will establish the Bureau's authority over some payment companies by defining them as larger participants. Explain this. How will this rule help prevent fraud? How will it protect service members and their money on payment apps?
Well, sadly, military-connected families report identity theft at way higher rates than the general population. They are often targeted for their data, for their money, and more. So we do think we have very large payment apps operating outside of the banking system. The law really asks us to make sure that there's even-handed oversight. Those entities are already subject to enforcement. We think some level of supervision, given the enormous number of people in our country using them, is modest and appropriate and will prevent some of the fraud that you discussed.
Thank you. I have 12 seconds. Yes or no question. Does CFPB's research suggest that credit card companies could lower their interest rates and still be profitable?
Yes.
Thank you. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Chopra, as I'm sure you heard during my opening comments, the CFPB's civil investigative demand, or CID process, is a prime example of your agency's vast attempts at regulatory overreach in an effort to chase obscure objectives and pet interests. A company, a small business, subject to one of your CIDs can spend years and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, attempting to comply with never-ending CFPB demands. Adding insult to injury, a company subject to CID compliance can be left hopeless for change, since any appeal is ultimately described and determined by you, the judge, and the jury. In fact, under your leadership, all CID appeal requests have been denied. And just a few months ago, you eliminated the role of the Associate Director of the Division of Supervision, giving yourself even greater control over all appeal decisions. How many CIDs has the CFPB issued under your leadership?
So let me say up top that enforcing the law doesn't just protect consumers, it protects honest businesses.
How many CIDs
And let me just also correct that that's not true.
How many have you?
I don't have the exact number.
10, 50,
Well, we have
500?
During my time as director, we've I think recovered around $8 billion.
So
So
how
that's
many
been a lot of
CIDs
enforcement
have you-
actions.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that you've been.
Senator, I have
No doubt about
I would be eager to meet with you. I would like to really discuss this with you. Our enforcement program has shifted away from small actors to large repeat offenders.
frankly,
There's certainly the
Director
need
Chopra, let me
to
just say
use
this.
civil investigative
I would love
demands.
to see your process work, but it's like having a bully in a school that keeps beating on
This is
the
how
same
every
person.
other agency works as well.
Actually,
So,
your one agency is the one agency that does not flow through Congress.
that's also not true.
your
Most
resources
other
do not.
financial
Actually, it goes to the
regulatory
Federal Reserve.
agencies do that.
The bottom
So
line
we
is
are
simply
going to
this,
keep
that
doing
you
our
have
enforcement work.
consistently abused your power.
That is
Frankly,
totally
I asked
not
you a
true,
specific
Senator.
question as it relates to the CIDs, and I get no answer. So let me go on to a different question, because I like the marketing strategy from the Biden administration as it relates to junk fees, because frankly, if you say the word junk fees, you assume that those junk fees are just unnecessary. I'm not sure that the average business person and or the consumer would see the late fees, the overdraft fees, and non-sufficient fund fees as junk fees. There's no question that the Biden administration has done a fabulous job of trying to highlight and market to the American people that these fees are unnecessary. Well, you said it's $10 billion. I'll take your word on that. The bottom line is simply this, that as a business functions If you do not collect those fees from people who are delinquent on their payments, then you find those fees someplace else. So the fee structure may go away, but the revenues must be replaced by something else. And they're consistently replaced by either higher interest rates on credit cards or higher fees on accounts, or the elimination of those accounts, because if you can't find the revenues to maintain profitability from that sector of your business, what you essentially do is you eliminate them. Having been in business for 20 plus years, I can tell you that the bottom line is a simple one, that if your lowest performing consumers aren't incentivized to continue to perform better, you typically stop offering those products and services to those consumers. And when that happens, they don't just stop asking for the resources. They go to a different market where the interest rates are higher and or where there is no regulation whatsoever. Why are late fees okay for government agencies like the IRS, but not okay for businesses?
Well, so there's a congressional ban on unreasonable credit card penalties. And when the rules were implemented over a decade ago, there was a loophole which the credit card industry's lawyers have just driven a truck through to the tune of $10 billion a year. I think junk fees are a huge problem in our economy. I think it's one that is bipartisan in nature in terms of reform. People are really sick and tired of not seeing the full cost up front, but rather being nickeled and dimed on the back end. The thing about capitalism that's great, when you can compare the prices clearly, the best offerer will win out. But when you make the pricing so complex and convoluted, that's not good for the honest businesses. And frankly, our smaller banks and credit unions don't build a business model off of this loophole, and we should be doing more to support them, I think.
I would simply say that speaking with forked tongue is common in the Biden administration, number one. Number two, I would simply say this, as my time is running out, according to the chairman's red button. I wish we had congressional bans on the IRS charging late fees and interest on balances due. I wish we had a consistent standard applied to the public sector as we do the private sector. We'd probably have a better outcomes.
We should work on that together.
Thank you.
Heard that offer, Scott?
Is it an offer for us to have a conversation about the inability for folks on the left to make common sense with the high oppressive nature of government? I'm happy to have a dialogue with that.
Senator Reed from Rhode Island's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Director. We're seeing a rise of a new fintech product that provides consumers with cash advances, and these loans are marketed as having no mandatory fees and charging no interest, and also but soliciting tips and donations, which is an interesting model. And while these fees are supposedly voluntary, in fact, you will not get the loan unless you ante up. And these are typically short-term loans with, and when you do the math in terms of their voluntary tips or donations, the percentage interest rate is astounding, like 511%. Do you believe that these tips and donations should be treated as interest charges, which would trigger consumer protections, particularly military, who have been protected by the 36% limit?
Well, we recently, Senator Reed, charged a company with violating the law on specifically those grounds. In fact, when the consumer sought to get the loan, it was impossible to not leave a tip. It was just a fake tip. So I think we're looking for all the ways in which companies are trying to sidestep these long-standing protections that have been around for 50 years. Some of these companies brand themselves with different types of terms. We're looking at the facts, and if they are pushing people into a finance charge, federal law is pretty clear that they need to disclose it clearly with an interest rate so that people can compare. And as Senator Scott was mentioning, we need to be able to look and compare so the best player wins.
Thank you. I was very pleased to see the CFPB issue an interpretive rule last month clarifying that many of the rules for credit cards also apply to buy now, pay later loans. And now that the CFPB has clarified which rules to apply, the CFPB should bring the biggest BNPL lenders under federal supervision in order to spot violations. That's my view. Do you have an update on the progress towards examining these buy now, pay later firms as on a compulsory basis?
Yeah, we do have certain authorities to supervise those types of lenders. Some of them, we can work with states who license them. In other cases, we can issue them a notice for which they can reply, and we can determine whether supervision is warranted. But I want to be clear, I take your point very seriously that the CFPB cannot be behind the 8 ball when it comes to buy now, pay later. We have tried to stay ahead of it. It is fast growing, and it's an important part of our consumer credit market, and we need to make sure it's growing on the merits, not based on regulatory loopholes.
In that sense, do you need any additional authorities to keep ahead of it?
Well, certainly, if you would like to make sure that they are subject to federal supervision, we can work with you. We do have some authorities, but if you'd like to see more dedicated to that, we are happy to work with you on it.
And with respect to another aspect of the BNPL market, unlike credit card companies, they do not uniformly report consumer repayments to the major credit reporting bureaus. And this could raise a host of problems. Consumers may not get the benefits of responsibly using credit in terms of improved credit scores, and the industry cannot see a consumer's full debt load. So what are your tools to incentivize the credit reporting bureaus to include BNPL?
Yeah, one of the things that's worth noting is the auto lenders and mortgage lenders, they're very concerned that buy now, pay later is not on the credit report. Because they're saying to me, how are we supposed to know if the person is able to afford this if we don't know what all these buy now, pay later loans are? And for buy now, pay later companies themselves, we've asked them, how do you know what other loans people have? So I think we'd want to talk to all of you to figure out. Right now, it's not a requirement of federal law to report, but it is something we have some worries about.
Credit card use is going up dramatically, and people are reaching their limits quickly, and particularly Gen Z rather. Given the situation of credit cards, do you believe there are similar dynamics in the market for buy now, pay later loans, i.e. that they will be overused by the customer?
I think just like credit cards, there are some serious concerns about over-indebtedness and people getting in over their head. It is something that we all need to pay close attention to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director.
Thank you, great. Senator Browns from South Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Director Chopra. In questions for the record following an April of 2022 Senate bank hearing, Senator Menendez asked you whether Regulation E of the Electronic Fund Transfer Act required refunds for consumers who are scammed, as opposed to victims of fraud. Your response, I viewed as rather vague, and I want to clarify it, because it suggested that certain Regulation E provisions apply to peer-to-peer services, but not directly addressing the question. So to clarify it, does the CFPB believe that consumer-authorized but fraudulently induced transfers are considered unauthorized electronic fund transfers under the EFTA? You want to? Yeah.
It's a pretty technical question. We're also happy to take that question again for the record. But the general sense is that with respect to fraud and scams, the line is a little bit blurry. And it is true that there has been an increase in what has been called push payment fraud. And so one of the places, there is the Regulation E framework, but there's also the network rules that govern, for example, ACH, other things. Typically, those network rules have set some of the parameters for the responsible party with it. So I think this has been a place where the nature of electronic funds fraud has evolved, But
Right.
it's hard for me to give you, and I'd like to
Okay.
give you a more black and
And,
white
and I'm going
answer.
to ask for it for the record, but I just want to make under Regulation E, it sounds like, and you can clarify this right now, it doesn't sound like it's Regulation E that you would look at this, perhaps under other areas, specifically with regard to ACH activity.
Well, there are some places where Regulation E would certainly apply.
Give me an example.
It is something that I don't want to misstate, but I'm happy to really answer that for you and meet with you.
Yeah, I mean,
because
look, this is a pretty big deal.
I agree.
Because it's one thing, the way that it was originally intended was that if it is the fault of the organization, the system set up, where somebody actually gets in and is defrauded out of a loss, that's different than if somebody makes a decision and then uses the system to transfer, even though the fraudster on the other side of it is responsible and the individual has decided that they want to transfer it. I don't see
Yeah.
how an organization, in the middle of this.
So
thing
here's
should
the
be
issue. I
accountable
think
for that.
sometimes the way in which the money moves, just like when a financial institution's information might be taken, a consumer's credential information may be taken from the financial institution. So there are places where you are able to simulate an outbound transfer that may actually be fraudulent. So
I am going to ask you to put that to the record.
Yep.
Because this is a really important.
No, I appreciate this so much. Fraud is real. Electronic frauds are getting more complicated with use of generative AI. So we do have to think about what do we want to make sure we're offering guidance so that it is clear how we deal with these things. But I completely appreciate the sensitivity
Okay,
on
and
this.
I'm going to ask you a little bit about AI in a minute, but I want to get to one more item first. I have to admit that I was very disappointed yesterday to see the CFPB's proposed rule to eliminate medical debt from credit reports. Just 6 months ago, when you were last before the committee, I expressed my concerns with simply excluding medical debt from credit reports, as medical professionals may simply switch to cash-only transactions. I asked you if you were looking at how the healthcare industry would respond, and you assured me that you were. However, after reviewing the rules analysis, I did not see any stakeholder outreach to the healthcare provider community. That said, there is a section in the analysis on the costs to healthcare providers. My question's, how many physicians did the organization actually consult before issuing the proposal? And how many members of the healthcare industry or providers in general did you consult with? And was any of their input actually integrated into the rulemaking?
Yeah, just to be clear, this is a proposed rule, so it's not final, but I think we did do a lot of outreach in terms of understanding the different dynamics between hospitals, between independent providers, between other types of facilities, the integration with the health insurance system. So I remember your question last time. It is something I too have been really wanting to make sure we get right, because we don't want to see this be something that is abused, but we also want to understand all the potential effects.
I think it is critical that you follow and take into account what will happen to these folks that send out a bill and then they have to pay their bills as well. And I think that has to be taken into account in this
Oh,
situation.
absolutely. And as a general matter, we see that not all financial medical providers do this. There's a lot of differences, and there's some important differences when there's insurance companies involved.
Okay, and I know I'm out of time, but I have just one very quick, and I think you can answer this with a yes or a no, Mr. Chairman. Director Chopra, does a company have to abide by the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the Fair Housing Act, and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, regardless of what technology they use, AI or otherwise?
Yeah, there is no AI exemption in any of those statutes.
They all are subject to existing regulation. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Brown. Senator Smith of Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Chair Brown, and welcome. It's great to have you here, Director Chopra. I want to ask a question first about kind of issues around tenant screening. This is something that I've been really concerned about, how landlords can use algorithms and other kinds of black box technology that could be built on bad information. And I've heard from my constituents in Minnesota stories of prospective tenants who have had their rental applications rejected because of this kind of based on, because the application review was based on outdated or erroneous or just incomplete data. For example, one of my constituents was denied an apartment because a tenant screening flagged an incorrect criminal record. So my question is, I know that the CFPB has been actively engaged on this issue. Could you just briefly talk a little bit about what actions that you've taken so far to improve the accuracy of these reports and increase transparency for consumers?
Yes, we've taken enforcement actions, including against TransUnion for violating the Fair Credit Reporting Act and its tenant screening. We've issued a number of guidance documents to really make sure that this business is adhering. You know, Senator Smith, you, Senator Kennedy, others, people who might have common surnames are particularly victimized by this. They're matched with someone who is not them, and then it is almost impossible sometimes to figure out how to get it fixed.
Right.
We're also making clear to landlords and others that, you know, if they're using one of these credit reports, they really need to make sure that they're complying with the Fair Credit Reporting Act too.
Because even though it might be a black box to even the landlord, that doesn't matter because they're still held accountable, as I understand it, for whether they're making fair decisions or not.
Yeah, depending on the circumstance, the AI company, the tenant screener, the landlord, we really worry about how the data and the algorithms are being deployed, especially when it's just matching the wrong person or using outdated information.
Right. And that has a huge impact when people are already struggling to figure out how to find an affordable place to live and what happens next with that. I want to move to another topic quickly. The CFPB's most recent report on mortgage activity found that in 2022, mortgage applications of Black and Hispanic borrowers were denied at higher rates than white and Asian borrowers. And I understand that even if they were approved, they typically were receiving smaller loans at higher rates with more upfront fees. And now, of course, the report acknowledges that Black and Latino borrowers may typically have lower credit scores, which could have contributed to this disparity. But a recent study done by the Minneapolis Fed found that even if you correct for those disparities, even after adjusting for those factors such as credit scores and incomes and wealth, we're still seeing disparities in what's happening with mortgages. So, Director Chopra, how can we better identify and capture what factors are driving these disparities, and what is the CFPB doing, maybe with the Justice Department, to enforce fair lending laws in this context?
Well, certainly, both the Justice Department and the CFPB have taken a number of actions when it comes to redlining. We took the first action in Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania related to a non-bank redlining company. But, you know, these are hard to do case by case. So part of the way I think we're trying to work with the industry is figure out where are there barriers when it comes to offering loans fairly to everybody. I think the Community Reinvestment Act plays a certain role. I think some companies and lenders are using other programs, but it's clear we have work to do here.
Well, thank you. I think that this is, again, as issues of housing are so crucially important across the country, and as people are struggling to find an affordable place to live, to find that you are just not, somehow the door to getting a mortgage for your first home possibly is just closed to you is such a huge limit on the opportunity that people have to build wealth and to have a great place to live.
And if you're paying so much more than what you should for your credit risk,
Right.
that has a big impact on your monthly budget.
Exactly. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Smith, Senator Kennedy from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Director. Good to see you.
Same.
Thanks for coming. I always enjoy your testimony. When I look for a common thread running throughout your testimony, and I look at your agency's behavior, one of the common threads I see is that, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on this, is that in your judgment, some companies in America are making too much money. Now, when you analyze their financial statements, do you not?
Sure.
Do you distinguish between revenue and earnings when you analyze a financial statement?
Well, sure, we look at all things, and I would say that we
What's
don't
the
think of
difference
too much
between
money.
revenue and earnings?
Well, these are all used colloquially. Sometimes those are similar. In GAAP accounting, which is what most U.S. companies use,
Don't
they
tell
use
me
net-
about GAAP. Just tell me your understanding of the difference between revenue and earnings.
Well, I can share with you revenue and net income. So those are the two factors that when you say are on financial statements.
Earnings is another word for net income.
Well, earnings can be used for many different things, but in generally accepted accounting principles, net income is what all of our banks are really using.
Okay. Well, revenue is before expenses, and earnings, net income, is after expenses. Is that?
No, I think like when people go to work, they say, my earnings were this. I mean, that's their salary. So I think we tend to look
No,
at
I'm not
accounting
talking.
definitions.
They may say that, but when you analyze a financial statement, you look at expenses, don't you? If you don't just equate revenue with earnings, do you?
Oh, totally. And I think your
Okay,
suggestion that we think companies are too profitable, we think about competition.
I understand.
What are the options people
Well,
have
here's
in
what
order to?
here's what is confusing me. We all know, unless you were playing Frisbee in the quad during Econ 101 or Accounting 101, there's a difference between revenue and earnings. I want to ask about the way you're funded. I looked at Congress's statute. I'm looking for it here. It says, here's how you're funded. And you just won your lawsuit in the Supreme Court. Each year, beginning on the designated transfer date, in each quarter thereafter, the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, where you get your money, shall transfer to your agency from the combined earnings of the Federal Reserve System the amount determined by the director to be reasonably necessary to carry out the authorities of the Bureau. It says the combined earnings, not the revenue. Now, for the longest time, the Federal Reserve was earning money, but that stopped in September of 2022? Now, they are losing money. They don't have any earnings. They're no longer transferring earnings to the general fund. And the Supreme Court based its decision on saying that this funding scheme is constitutional under the Appropriations Clause by saying that these earnings would go to the general fund from the Federal Reserve, so getting them directly from the general fund is no big deal. How are you entitled to any money right now? The Federal Reserve doesn't have any earnings.
Well, we've heard of this theory. I think it's one of the latest
It's not a
ones that's
theory.
being
It's a
pushed.
congressional
Well,
statute.
I think there's you raised the difference between revenue and net income. There are other places throughout our laws. I can tell you we've looked at this issue. We do believe wholeheartedly everyone is complying with the statute.
I
when
know
it
you
comes to
believe that,
this.
but if you look at
I'm aware with what you said,
if you
revenue
read,
and net
if you
income.
read the, if I could just finish my question.
Sure.
If you read the opinion, and I did, and you read the statute, it says here, bigger than Dallas, you can only get your money from the Federal Reserve out of earnings. Now, the Federal Reserve has not had any earnings since September of 2022. Isn't that correct?
No, that's not correct.
Sure, it's
From
correct.
a net income
All you
perspective,
have to do is
you're
go-
right.
is go-
But they've
go-
generated lots
go
of
ask
fees
OMB.
and income. And I appreciate what you're saying. I'm happy to discuss this with you, but I think we've looked at this.
My point is, every penny you've gotten under this congressional
I don't think
statute,
Congress wanted the
every penny
CFPB to be
that you
suddenly
have gotten, if I could
defunded.
finish my thought.
Sure.
I know you don't like to hear this, but the law is the law. You've been operating illegally.
No, that's not true, sir.
Yes, you have. There have been no earnings. Doesn't this put in jeopardy every one of your rules?
We've heard this
and
theory
every
before,
one
and I'm
of,
happy to
and
discuss it.
well, you're going to hear it again because it's the law. We didn't say revenue in the statute. We said earnings. how can you possibly argue that the Federal Reserve has had earnings? They're losing money.
I'm happy to discuss this with you, but we have looked at this theory before.
I know you have, but
Yeah.
I'm over. I'm sorry. Tell me why you're mad at Chase Bank.
You're not that sorry, Senator Kennedy, but go ahead.
You're mad at PayPal and Chase Bank. Can you tell me real quickly before Sharon cuts me off why you're mad
I
now
think
at PayPal and Chase
the
Bank?
concern is that we have seen an incident at PayPal where there was an attempt to censor people based on their speech. We've also seen that those companies are now going to be offering reportedly advertising based on your individual transaction data. I feel some of this is something we all need to figure out
Are
together.
you going to punish every company that has censored people's speech?
No, I do think.
I applaud that part.
I think
But do you
censorship
have
is
to
a big
approve?
problem.
Senator
Do
Kennedy,
you have to
time's
approve the
expired.
speech
Senator-
first?
No, I think
Time's
we should.
expired.
I think we're on the same page.
I'm over. I'm sorry. Thanks for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
You're not sorry, and I wasn't indulging you, but thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Warner,
Well,
recognized.
I'm sorry as I could be. Well, I will send you later
Senator
a
Warner, Virginia.
fruit basket to make up for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was about to say all kinds of nice things about Senator Kennedy. I still am in a moment
Go
about what-
ahead.
our work together on AI. And, as somebody who actually, I think I've not crossed over yet, where I can still claim I spent more time making earnings as a business guy than I have as a politician, although that time frame may have switched over. And I was with you on the whole direction you were going on revenue earnings until you brought up the Fed.
Well,
Because-
I know you know the difference between
I do
earnings
know the
and
difference,
revenue,
but on this one, Senator
because
Kennedy,
I've seen your house. It's bigger than a Costco.
yeah, it was
Have you-
poor
Have you
humble
seen
abode.
Warner's house?
Poor
It's bigger
humble
than a
abode.
Costco.
Poor humble abode, earned from the sweat of Spectrum and cellular phones and VC activity. But I do think the case that the director is making, it would be a fulsome debate to talk about whether the Fed has generated earnings or not. Because I think, as we all know, the Fed operates on its own set of rules distinct from everyone else. And maybe we ought to, I think we've got Chair Powell coming in, and we ought to have that conversation. And I do think, I'm glad, frankly, that the Supreme Court ruled that funding process was appropriate. I would remind you I was here when Dodd-Frank was taking place, and the whole way the CFPB came about was because, candidly, some of my Republican friends didn't want to set up a traditional new agency, so it was kind of put into this unusual framework and unusual funding mechanism. But I think, again, I count on the validity of what the court upheld. I do want to, though, compliment the fact that, Senator Kennedy and I both have been, I think, trying to figure out how we grapple with AI. It's something Director Chopra, you and I have talked about as well. We introduced the Financial Artificial Intelligence Risk Reduction FAIR Act. And the notion was, if there was ever a case, again, out of Dodd-Frank, we came up with FSOC. If there was ever a case of an area that was tailor-made for FSOC to look at holistically, it's AI. And I guess good news is maybe just the threat of this legislation has actually pushed them a little bit. Because I know FSOC recently released a request, an RFI for opportunities and risk of financial services. FSOC has stood up a staff-level working group. FSOC had a major conference. I know you've thought about this as well, Director Chopra. How do we make sure that, as we think through AI, when we think about all the benefits, we also try to build in those consumer protections, which are integral to your entity? And have you, I continue to grapple, and let me be the first to acknowledge, I spent a lot of time on this subject, and there is, mentioned this before in committee, no linear relationship, at least with me, in terms of more time spent on AI and actually getting smarter. Maybe the only guy that's getting smarter on this is Senator Rounds, because he's probably spending more time even than me. But, can you talk about how we make sure consumer protection is built in and those systemic risk issues get addressed?
Well, I'm really worried about the use of generative AI when it comes to voice cloning, other ways in which humans can be simulated to create enormous amount of fraud in the financial system. and the weaponization of people's personal data. I would say this on the systemic issues, Senator Warner. I am really worried about these foundational AI models. I think there'll probably be just a handful of them for which most of the industry is built on top of that. And when there are problems with one of those foundational models, we could really see issues that occur throughout sectors of the economy, including the financial system. There's a big integration, I think, of the big cloud providers. There are really just 3 of them, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. We got to think about their role in all of this and whether they're adequately overseen. Otherwise, one little tremor could cause a huge shock to the financial system.
Yeah, I'm frankly surprised that we've not seen AI tools already lead to market manipulation. I think if there was ever a set of tools that could, I mean, we spent a lot of time, I'm chairing the Intel Committee, looking at outside foreign use of interference in our elections. But, AI tools, not just deep fakes, but the ability to manipulate images, file fake consumer
Yes.
concerns. I would be amazed if we don't subsequently find out that maybe not Fortune 100 companies, but Fortune 100 to 500 companies, that there's a lot of manipulation going on here. I was going to get, I've gone through my time, and I will not. The extra 4 minutes, I do want to ask, I will come back and submit for the record, Director Chopra, one of the things I'm concerned about are some of the rise of the large firms that are non-bank. We've
Yes.
talked about this in the past, and how we, same activity ought to maybe have some same level of regulatory structure. And when we think about the non-bank wallets that are going to be in this sector, I don't think we've got near enough notional framework. And I'm all for financial innovation. I think great things will come, but I do think we've got to put some ground rules in place. And I will not further impugn upon the chair, and because I know my colleague, Senator Warren, who may have similar type questions.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Warren of Massachusetts, when she's reseated, politely not sitting down when her colleague was talking. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Director Chopra, the last time you were here, the Supreme Court was considering a lawsuit championed by predatory lenders and their Republican allies challenging the constitutionality of the CFPB funding. Now, fortunately, the Supreme Court followed the law, and the CFPB is here to stay. Now the Bureau can keep doing its work to deliver on President Biden's agenda, slashing junk fees, policing Wall Street, and so far returning over $20 billion to consumers. But Republicans just can't seem to quit you, Director Chopra. It's another day that ends in Y, so Republicans are concocting even more absurd legal arguments and taking even more extreme steps to try to stop the CFPB from doing its work on behalf of American families. Let's start with junk fees. For some reason, Republicans just love them. A few months ago, a Republican congressman said, and I quote, "Junk fees don't exist, okay? That's a figment of Rohit Chopra's imagination." So, Director Chopra, we have you here. I figured I'd go straight to the source. Are junk fees a figment of your imagination, like Bigfoot?
I don't know who said that, but I think for everyone who has experienced a junk fee, it's incredibly insulting because they are paying up for things that are providing sometimes no service whatsoever. And I'm really proud of the work we've done to wipe out billions of dollars of junk fees.
Do you have an estimate on how much Americans are paying in junk fees?
I don't have the latest update, but it is tens of billions of dollars. Our work, I think, is already delivering, taking out a huge chunk of that. It's making the economy more competitive and making pricing clear up front rather than scattered on the seventh screen.
It's a lot of money that American families are losing to junk fees, but since Republicans are falling all over themselves to defend these junk fees, I wonder if Republicans are hearing something different from the American people that I'm just not hearing. Director Chopra, the CFPB has a hotline for consumer complaints. People actually call you directly. So has anyone ever called the hotline to complain that they are not getting charged enough in junk fees on their credit cards or their bank accounts or their car loans?
I've never heard of that, ever.
Fair enough. You know, my sense is Americans are not clamoring for more junk fees, but Senate Republicans are ready to do the dirty work for their corporate pals. After the CFPB finalized its rule to limit exorbitant credit card late fees, Senate Republicans introduced a resolution to reverse the CFPB's rule and take $10 billion away from Americans. Now, fortunately, it doesn't seem to be stopping the CFPB from working on behalf of American families. Just last month, the Bureau launched an investigation into mortgage junk fees, including the closing costs that families pay when they buy a house. Director Chopra, can you say a little more about why the CFPB is focusing on junk fees in housing right now?
Well, those fees can really drain someone's down payment and really bump up a monthly payment if they're able to get the mortgage, or it could foreclose them from even getting a home. This is something where the mortgage lenders are also upset about because they're being price gouged and having to pass on some of those costs to consumers.
Right. And do you have any sense of whether those junk fees are holding level, going down, or going up?
They've been going up. We've been seeing, at least I can say about closing costs, a market increase in closing costs in the past several years.
So I saw one source citing that from 2021 to 2023, that closing costs rose by 36%. You have any explanation for that other than junk fees?
Well, there's certainly some aspects. It's possible there are more individuals doing points rate buy downs, but certainly there are other places where fees have been inflated that mortgage lenders and consumers are both pretty mad about.
So I understand that in 2022, a typical borrower paid nearly $6,000 in extra fees to close on a home, and that right now the CFPB is working on trying to put at least a chunk of that money back in the buyer's pocket. Is that right?
That's right. I think that will help the entire economy.
All right. So if you're wondering why Republicans are introducing legislation to protect junk fees and working overtime to come up with fantastical legal theories to kill the CFPB, I think the answer is pretty clear. Republicans are in bed with big business to rip off families and to protect corporate bottom lines. Director Chopra and President Biden are cracking down on junk fees so that they can help lower costs for American families. And I thank you for your work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Brett from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for being here, Mr. Director. I wanted to touch on several issues that you and I have discussed and wanted to see if you could provide some updates. So first, I have noted with you, both publicly and privately, my serious concerns about 1071. Concerns on both the privacy front and then the actual cost burden on the smallest community banks. So wanted to kind of let's just start on privacy first. You mentioned that the CFPB plans to publish the information it collects on this rule. Last time I kind of asked what your plans were for that. You said you had not gotten there yet. Do you have any update on that?
So the data collection that would be reported has been significantly delayed. Some of it will be as late as, I think, maybe late 2026. We're not going to make any determinations until after we really are able to conduct a first, world-class privacy assessment.
Okay, good.
So the key is we don't want anyone we don't re-identification risk. We don't want there to be any concerns about that because that will really undermine enormously.
Yeah, and so you are essentially, will you commit to me that the CFPB will not publish any identifying information?
Correct, yes.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Okay, now with regards to the cost, CFPB estimated that banks will face an upfront cost of around $45,000 to $78,000. Do you believe that's still an accurate depiction of the upfront compliance costs that banks should expect?
So we're working with many of those banks are going to be using third-party vendors in order to be able to implement this, those core service providers. So We are working with them. There is going to be a bit more time.
But
So
do you
to the
think
best of
that
my
cost is correct?
to the
Because-
best of my knowledge, that we use the best data as possible.
Yeah,
that
so
we
that
have.
data, so if you look to it, it says that, these things have to cover things like new computer software to collect and store data, to hire and train new compliance and legal staff, the expenses of possibly third-party audits and legal teams. And so that just seems like there's no way that you could do all of that with just that amount of money. And then I looked back to when that estimate was done, and the estimate was done in 2020. And obviously, since 2020, we've had a change in economic conditions, change in a number of things, whether it's inflation or hiring cost or any of those things. And so when you kind of take a step back, and then additionally, and you and I have talked about this, Dodd-Frank required 13 data points. It is my opinion that you have now expanded that to 81. I know that you and I can quibble about some of those things, but no doubt it is certainly more than 13. And so there's also an additional compliance mechanism that people, and that in 2020 we weren't accounting for. So economy, additional data, et cetera. So when you look at that, I think when you take a step back, there's no way that they're going to be able to do all of that for just $45,000 to $78,000. And so my question to you is will you commit to taking a look and making sure that that is an accurate cost analysis of what it's going to cost these banks?
Well, I think we're trying to follow all appropriate provisions of the law when it comes to this. This was not a discretionary rule. We were under a court order to complete it. We followed all the necessary steps
But
to
you
do
did
it.
you did expand it though. I mean, there is.
Well, actually, we didn't. I wouldn't characterize it as expanding it. The statute is pretty clear about what sort of data points had to be in there and where might it better contextualize the information. In fact, we got input from some industry members to include some data points to make sure that it's appropriately contextualized.
But if you even think about things that people are going to have to put in there, denial reasons, obviously a more extensive explanation there, pricing information, including interest rates applied, prepayment penalties, financial cost, et cetera. There's no doubt that in 2020, prior to you even being obviously at the CFPB, that analysis of how much that was going to cost doesn't take all of these things into consideration. And I would just ask you, you have said that obviously it is not your goal to put small community banks out of business, and you have said that you understand that they provide an essential service in our Main Street, that they allow people to achieve the American dream. What I am asking you is don't put them out of business. Make sure that you are taking a step back, really looking at how much this is going to cost them in 2024, in 2025, in 2026, that you're giving them that assessment on the front end so that they can plan. So that it actually doesn't hinder them in the long run. So I would greatly appreciate it if you would do that. Make sure that that's accurate, because I think that that's what's ultimately best for everyday Americans, everyday Alabamians, as people work to comply with this. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Brent. Senator Van Hollen's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Chopra, it's great to see you. And like the chairman, I was pleased to see the Supreme Court's decision, 7-2, supporting the CFPB structure. And most of us on this committee support its mission as well. I was listening a little bit into the hearing. I know people are now looking for other ways to try to dismantle the CFPB, but I am absolutely confident that it will remain intact and its mission for years to come to protect consumers. And I do want to start with some thank yous, especially the newly announced proposed medical debt rule. This is something many of us, including myself, have been working on for a very long time. There's no reason any American should be punished on their credit rating because they got into a car accident or got sick and incurred medical expenses. So your proposed rule to make sure that they're not penalized for unexpected events in their life, I think is very important. Look forward to monitoring that closely. Thanks also for your efforts on the overdraft fees. It is a form of predatory lending. I've often made the point that a $35 late fee on a $25 purchase that's repaid in 2 days is equivalent to an annual percentage interest rate greater than 25,000%. So appreciate your moving forward on that. I want to dig a little bit into your proposed rules on non-bank supervision because as you know, right now, the non-bank financial institutions have roughly $20.5 trillion in assets. The banking industry, by comparison, 23.7 trillion. So comparable in terms of the impact on the economy and assets anyway. A number of years ago, I had a constituent who had a checking account with Chime, a non-bank entity. When she tried to get her money out, she could not. Our office worked with her to file a complaint with the CFPB. Thank you for working to get her money back. And that, of course, happened to lots of other Marylanders and other people around the country. And so I was glad to see the enforcement action that you took against Chime. But if you could just use that as a sort of kicking off point to describe your proposals to make clear that the CFPB has jurisdiction in these non-bank areas, in fintech areas, and that you intend to assert that jurisdiction to protect consumers, and that you intend to do this carefully and smartly and wisely, and are not trying to use a hammer, but you are trying to protect consumers in accordance with your mission. Could you just talk about that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think one of the things we learned from the 2008 financial crisis was that it was those non-bank companies that were not subject to the same type of oversight that really led to the economy crashing. So one of the things that Congress is very clear with us is that we have to look at the whole financial system, not just banks and credit unions. I think that makes sure that consumer protection is even. And a consumer doesn't need to know the corporate organization form when they're doing business. We want consumers to be able to trust all these entities. I think that's good not just for consumers, but for honest businesses as well.
I appreciate that. And as you say, consumers sometimes don't know the ins and outs. They don't know what's an insured depository institution. And the whole purpose of the CFPB was to fill this very big gap. And again, when you look at the asset holdings of the non-bank sector in the finance space, it's virtually equivalent to the banking sector, which we spent a lot of time, understandably, on this committee focused on depository institutions and the like, but we need to be spending more time, I think, on the others as well. Briefly, in the remaining time, I know that CFPB recently filed a lawsuit against student loan servicer FIA for illegally pursuing borrowers whose loans have been discharged. A number of us on this committee have been very focused on the issue of really predatory practices by some of these student loan servicers. Could you talk about other measures you're taking to help students in this space?
Well, we've been monitoring very carefully the return to repayment. We've taken other actions to Ed Financial Services, also other types of student loan collections, debt relief. I hate to see that the servicing industry, when it spawns other scams, it just adds insult to injury to so many people who are just trying to get an education to better their own life.
Yeah, well, thank you for looking out for exactly those people through your efforts. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much to the Senator from Maryland, Senator Van Hollen. Senator from Wyoming, Senator Lummis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Director Chopra, welcome. I've got some questions about some of your policies that you're pushing forward. It looks to me like just about everything that you're proposing is to label closing costs junk fees, almost every closing cost. And banks need to understand a borrower's ability to repay. So let me give you one example. Are you aware of a CFPB staff working paper that found that rural borrowers report less understanding of the mortgage process at the outset, but the gap is completely closed by the time the purchase is complete? Now, this paper credits this to the extra education that banks in rural areas provide their customers and describes the importance of strong relationships in rural banking. And I can assure you, in these small communities, they want to know. They want to sit across the table from the president of the bank. They want to know who they're borrowing money from. So Is the consumer education a valuable service provided by community banks?
Yeah, hugely. One of our goals has been to preserve relationship banking in this increasingly digital age, and I worry, Senator Lummis, that has been drifting away. But on this issue, I don't think there's been any attempt to label all closing costs as junk fees. In
Well,
fact,
is
mortgage-
this one being labeled a junk fee? The cost to educate consumers? The cost to educate borrowers?
No, not at all. And in fact, that's actually typically not as a closing cost. I think when we talk to mortgage lenders are not able to, hike the price on those closing costs. They actually have to put forth bona fide costs and educate, offer disclosures. What we do see mortgage lenders complaining to us about is they've often been getting ripped off on certain types of things that they have to pass on to consumers. And we're really worried that this may lead them to reduce the number of applications or even the number of individuals they can talk to about it.
And we're worried about that too. So it sounds like a disconnect between some of the Wyoming bankers I'm hearing from and your agency, so we need to bridge that.
And we've met
We
with
need
them,
to
and I'm
bridge
going to
that
meet with
gap.
them again if there's concerns about it, because I think one of
There's,
the...
there is concern about it. I've got a couple more questions.
Please.
Okay. The cost of providing financial services has to be borne somewhere. So overdraft fees, like the cost of maintaining safe and secure and convenient consumer banking systems, overdraft fees can help pay that. So consumers now have access to free checking, free online banking, free debit cards, and that's because of overdraft fees and interchange fees bearing that cost so they can make these free offerings. What percentage of low-income consumers would no longer be able to afford a bank account if they had to pay for each service, not just overdraft fees at cost?
Well, the main way banks make money is obviously off of lending out deposits. But certainly I would say this with
And
respect...
lending, and that's an area where they can lend out deposits based on what the market will bear.
Oh, totally. And that's what we're saying with respect to overdraft is, one, we have exempted small banks from any proposal we've made. But what we've said is that if you're going to be offering an overdraft loan, it's impossible to compare that with another type of loan. So we looked at a 1969 regulation implemented by the Fed, which was really designed for a paper check in the mail world. And we're trying to create a framework that really promotes a competitive structure on lending while also limiting some of the abuses. We've seen cases where sometimes the consumer should have gotten one overdraft fee but got four instead. And that's what we're trying to fix.
Okay. I got one more question that I want to get in. Your recent rule proposal on digital consumer payment applications is of concern to me. Why did the staff not gather the data and information necessary to complete a more thorough analysis? The CFPB estimates the cost of being examined by the CFPB at $25,000. So let's compare that to what it costs the bank to be examined. And when you make the comparison, the CFPB is charging 50 times more to conduct an exam than it costs for a company to be examined. That sounds like a huge...
To be clear, unlike the OCC, we don't charge fees for our examinations. But we have proposed that rule. We want to get a lot of feedback on all of our estimates. And Senator Lummis, I'm very happy to talk it all through with you because I do want to make sure when it comes to the future of consumer payments, we want to make sure that whether it's bank or non-bank, that those core federal laws that consumers have, that it's all on the up and up.
I'll look forward to that conversation. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Lummis. I'll ask my question, and let me start by sharing how glad I am, Director Chopra, that the CFPB's funding structure is still intact. I joined my colleagues, was happy to join my colleagues in an amicus brief to the Supreme Court protecting the Bureau, and I'm glad that they got that right, and that the Supreme Court upheld the structure of the CFPB. CFPB so that we can continue this very, very vital and important work. Director Chopra, yesterday, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau announced a proposed rule that would block medical debt from appearing on most Americans' credit reports. The last time you appeared before this committee, we discussed this bipartisan report that I released not long ago on insulin desert counties with both high rates of Americans who are uninsured and high rates of Americans who have diabetes. We see these counties all across the United States, concentrated largely in the South, but by no means exclusively in the South. High rates of uninsured people, high rates of diabetes. Director Chopra, do you know how many of these insulin deserts also have high rates of medical debt?
So we do believe that this is disproportionately harming some of those communities, especially in the South. I think it's pretty tragic that we have a system where people can be really punished over and over again for health issues and in a way that can destroy their financial life. Medical debts can contribute to bankruptcy. It can contribute to so much loss of income. And I do think what we've proposed is an important step to just a little bit put a stop to some of this.
Yeah, so, and my data shows that nearly half of these insulin deserts also have high levels of medical debt. So you've got places like the state of Georgia that's still digging in its heels, refusing to expand Medicaid. You've got the working poor who are burdened by all of this medical debt, uninsured, all of these issues converging upon families at the same time. In Georgia, 27% of rural residents had medical collections on their credit report, 27%. That's 6 percentage points higher than the rate among all Georgians and 10 percentage points higher than the national average. So 27% of rural residents with medical collection debt. Director Chopra, how would folks in the South especially benefit from a CFPB proposed rule banning medical debt from credit reports?
Well, we expect that it will materially help their lives. In many cases, if medical debt is their only thing on their credit report, it will also materially increase their credit score. That means really the cost of so many other loans, auto loans, credit cards would go down for them. And more importantly, I think they wouldn't be dealing with adding insult to injury when it comes to their own health conditions.
So this would have a material impact, obviously, on the lives of families. I often say that it's expensive to be poor. And this is an example of that. People burdened by medical debt, dragging down their credit scores. And so then the cost of money
Goes up.
goes up.
This is a cycle that we have to stop.
Right, right. So thank you so very much. This is something that we've been pushing on this. And so I applaud you for proposing this rule, which would be life-changing for so many people across the country, but certainly throughout the South who are drowning in medical debt and bad credit, often while dealing with health challenges on top of all of this. This is enough to make anybody sick and sicker. So I'll continue to push my bipartisan bill to cap the cost of insulin for everyone. That would prevent people with diabetes from going into medical debt in the first place. And I look forward to continuing to work with you on medical debt issues and addressing challenges and solutions in my subcommittee.
And let me thank you for working with me on this. I know we had a number of discussions. I know how much it uniquely affects some of the people you serve, so I appreciate all your engagement on it.
Thank you so much. And since it's just the two of us here, you're stuck with me. I've got some more questions I'm going to ask. There's a saying that if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. The CFPB studied the buy now, pay later market and saw that it had the features of a credit card, that consumers should get key credit card protections when they use this option. Director Chopra, thank you for issuing a common sense interpretive rule that lets consumers dispute BNPL charges, get a refund, and receive periodic billing statements, I remain concerned about protecting data privacy. What will the CFPB do to make sure BNPL lenders do not harvest and sell consumers' data without permission, and make sure that the data is secure?
It's a huge concern. I think this is something that is critical that this committee has to be working on. We are seeing so many companies announce new initiatives about how they're going to monetize their surveillance of us. Right now, Senator Warnock, you basically get a notice telling you, here's all the ways we're going to use your data. Good luck to you.
Right.
No one really opts out of that, and people don't even understand how much that data is going to be used. And I'm worried we're lurching more toward a surveillance-oriented system. It's really important that we work together to limit some of the excessive and intrusive surveillance.
Sure, absolutely. People just check the box and they're moving on. They're focused on their.
Yeah, sometimes they may not even be checking the box. They might be just told through the notice that we're planning to use it for all sorts of purposes. And I think when it comes to this, we're looking at these data brokers as well. These new companies that are buying and selling our personal data. It's also a real national security concern. President Biden has issued an executive order that also urges the CFPB to crack down on some of these data brokers who may not be complying with the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
I think it's so important that people have control over their own data and how companies are using it. I'm also concerned that BNPL loans can lead to a debt trap. What can the CFPB do to keep consumers from sinking under the weight of having too many BNPL loans at once?
Well, it's a really hard question. Both credit cards and buy now, pay later, people can suffer from can really get in over their head and suffer some real financial challenges. So there's now lots of BNPL companies. In many cases, people might have loans with all of them, and it's not just for one type of big purchase. It used to be maybe it was for a substantial purchase that people needed to pay over time. Now you can use buy now, pay later loans for really almost anything, including everyday purchases. So that could lead into an over-indebtedness, and I think we need to make sure we have accurate information about that and that you're all looking about whether there needs to be enhanced protections on credit cards and buy now, pay later loans.
Absolutely, and the public can provide comments on the interpretive rule and buy now, pay later, generally until August 1st. Is that correct?
That's right, and we do think that this buy now, pay later interpretive rule addresses a key pain point that many consumers express, which is when they return a product, are they going to get the appropriate credit? What if there is an erroneous charge? Under federal law, there are certain protections that are long and well understood. There's no exemption for buy now, pay later, and in many cases, they meet the definition for open-end credit or credit cards or whatever it may be that triggers important obligations. We want there to be innovation based on reality, not regulatory arbitrage.
An important issue and one that I'll continue to monitor under my subcommittee on financial institutions and consumer protection. As chair of that subcommittee, I held a hearing on junk fees in July of last year, and I'm pleased that in January, the CFPB issued proposals to restrict fees for overdrafts and non-sufficient funds. Many banks have reduced their fees voluntarily. The CFPB looked at data from 2019 through 2023 and found that consumers have saved more than $6 billion annually in overdraft and NSF fees, $6 billion. However, voluntary fee reductions seem to have hit a plateau. Director Chopra, when do you expect to finalize rules restricting overdraft and NSF fees?
Well, we're hoping any rules would take effect in 2025. We think it would create a more competitive market. And I just want to appreciate all the work being done when it comes to tackling the the whole creep of junk fees in the economy. It has been one of the worst innovations in our marketplaces. People need to see the price clearly. They don't need to be charged for mysterious services that they don't even want. And I really want to encourage you, Senator Warnock and others, to think about codifying some of our rules into statute so that, if there's strange legal theories or dragged out litigation from the junk fee lobby, that it won't stop the important benefits of this work.
And I think that's something we certainly should take a look at. And I look forward to seeing us finalize these rules. And as you suggest, think about which of the rules or portions of the rule we may need to codify into law. I'm pleased that the CFPB finalized a rule to require banks to show their work when they set credit card late fees. Families need to use their hard-earned money to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads rather than paying junk fees. It adds insult to injury to be charged a late fee when you mail a payment on time, but it arrives late. We won't get into the issues around the post office that many of us are addressing. Consumers can't get a break in that regard. I've heard from Georgians who are concerned that bill payments they sent by mail may arrive late due to postal service delays. They may get charged then a late fee on their mortgage or credit card account through no fault of their own. Also, those who are in the market for credit may find that payments marked as late then affect their credit score or cause them to have to pay more for credit. Is there anything that CFPB can do to protect consumers from being charged a late fee due to mail delays?
We got to figure this one out because I'm also hearing that there are other clerical errors where people initiate the bill payment and they have a confirmation, but it doesn't actually get received or it's claimed to not be received. I don't know how we solve this, but the federal law for credit cards does offer some protections on this. I think our work to rein in the abuse of this late fee loophole will help, but you're right. I think there's more we can do and we should figure that out.
Well, thank you so much for your attention, and I'll continue, even as I raise these issues, to press the Postmaster General and other top leaders of the Postal Service to immediately implement solutions to fix this unacceptable situation. Certainly, the Postal Service shouldn't be a drag on the credit scores of ordinary people who are just trying to pay the bills. And with that, I'll turn to Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you to the chairman. Director Chopra, it's good to see you again. First off, I want to thank you and your staff. Incredible work you're doing on behalf of so many people across the country, including in Nevada, when it comes to fighting for them really to be treated fairly by banks, lenders, and other financial institutions. Thank you. I do want to talk a little bit about a couple of things. One, I want to put on your radar and maybe have you elaborate a little bit more for purposes of just the general public, is the Corporate Repeat Offenders Registry. Most often, when law enforcement catches people who violate the law, they are subject to the criminal justice system, right? Full force and effect. But when large corporations violate the law, they can often settle without admitting wrongdoing, pay a nominal fee, and sometimes go back to doing business as usual, right? Or it's the cost of doing business. We have seen this time and time again that certain companies seem to have a culture that really disregards obeying the law when it comes to their customers. So how is the Consumer Bureau deterring repeat corporate offenders through this new registry?
Yeah,
Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think this issue of repeat offenders by large or politically connected companies is a pretty sick part of how the system works. You cannot have one set of rules for some people where a small business gets obliterated, but a large company doing the same thing, essentially just pays a nominal amount. So what we've done is we've finalized a rule to create a new registry to deter repeat offenses. Recall when you were Attorney General, there were places where people would start up and harm consumers and then move across state lines even after they were caught. So this is going to be a way in which all of us, state and federal, can coordinate where these rings, scammers, corporate repeat offenders are moving, and also to put into place some real accountability. As part of our rule, we'll be requiring for certain entities that an individual attest that they are actually complying with the terms of any law enforcement order. So we think this is an important part of getting a little bit more rule of law and making sure that it's not just paying a little bit of penalties, but they're stopped cold before they even try.
Is the registry available to the public, to the consumer, so they can be aware of what the activities of some of these corporations?
Yeah, that our rule contemplates making some of this public. Many of those orders are already public, but they're scattered in different places. We do think it's important for law enforcement and the public to really have one place they can go.
That's great. And let me just say, because I want to connect this also with our service members. You and I have talked about this. The Bureau does incredible work protecting our active military. There's about 1.3 million active duty service members and 19.5 million veterans and their families. And you and I both know they're always targeted for their federal benefits. That's why, one, I thank you for the work you're doing. Two, I have actually introduced 2 bills to create new criminal offense for fraud that targets veterans' benefits and to strengthen penalties for fraudsters who target veterans. Given the high level of scams that we see, do you agree that toughening the penalties would help deter these criminals? That's my first question. And then two, predatory lenders that target members of the military, is there a way that the public can be aware of them as well? So as a deterrent, so that we're bringing public attention to more of these challenges? And then how do we get this information to the general consumer so they know?
Yeah, I think that we need to see much more when it comes to criminal liability for this type of fraud. It's pretty disgusting what you see out there, and the fact that they can start something else new is just totally inappropriate. Senator Cortez Masto, we also are working with the states to figure out how they can pull the licenses for some of these outfits rather than just letting them keep going. There has to be a point where it's just too far. And you're right, I think our database registry will aid in the efforts of making sure that there's greater information for the public so that they can know who to best do business with.
Thank you. I've got about 20 seconds left, but you're also on the forefront of using artificial intelligence, or you've expressed some actually concerns about artificial intelligence, specifically its ability to aggregate mass amounts of consumer data. But you noted there are, and I quote, longstanding laws on the books to address potential abuse of AI. What existing laws are applicable, I guess?
Yeah, our view, I think the law is clear that there's not an exemption for fancy technology in the Fair Credit Reporting Act, Equal Credit Opportunity Act, Truth in Lending. So we have found places where sometimes people say, well, it's AI. We don't really know how the decision was made or why someone was denied credit. And our response is, then you can't use that fancy AI because federal law requires you to give a notice about why someone was denied credit under multiple laws. I think this is a place where we've made a lot of progress because now some of these AI tools used by financial institutions are making sure that they follow federal law because we will hold them accountable if they don't. Generative AI is another place. That's not a license to lie. When it comes to people's federal rights and if they assert them, if a generative AI chatbot tells them wrong information or denies them, the company is liable for that. And we need to make sure we don't create a scenario where there's an alternative world where robots don't have to follow the laws made by us as people.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the good work again. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you so very much, Director Chopra, for your work. Thank you for your testimony, and for senators who wish to submit questions for the hearing record, those questions are due on Tuesday, June 18th. And to the witness, please submit your responses to questions for the record 45 days from the day you receive them. With that, this hearing is adjourned.